Right. So, wanted to just think a bit about people, just a little bit on, for those of you who feel particularly called to be involved in terms of like, to be councillors or politicians or actually something like that, you know, that's something, or you know someone like that, and you, just a few little thoughts on that, and then we'll look at some Bible stuff just to make sure that we're thinking straight about politics and getting the big picture. So, for those who are called to be very involved, you know, you might choose to stand as some kind of independent councillor, independent MP, to you know, to start your own thing. Now, you're probably not going to win a seat. It has happened, but it probably won't happen. But what you can do through that is be a voice for something that's particularly important and that maybe none of the main parties are really talking about, you know? So it's not a lost cause, and you can end up influencing, you know, you could get a more powerful party that hears and sees what you're doing and he influences them and says, we need to actually get on this. It's a bit of a cynical approach, but do you understand what I'm saying? You can influence in different ways, and I do think there have been times where, you know, you've had someone literally stand on one thing. It's about the local hospital closing, you know, and they've literally stood, you know, on that. That's all they're campaigning about, but like in a general election, really extraordinary. But what that would have done is that would have made some sort of noise, caused some sort of splash. People would have noticed. It would have given, and then of course if they get some votes, people, you know, everyone looks up and goes, "This is a democracy." And it does sound a bit cynical. But you know, the reality is, if you're one of the parties that's going to potentially be in power, you need to know what really matters to the people, as well as what your own ideology is, because you're not just going to want to be true to your principles. You're also going to want to be in power, right? Therefore, you need to know what is on people's minds. So that could be a really interesting thing. You might decide to, like I said earlier, to start some kind of Christian party. I would just say there's an absolute minefield of things that could go wrong with that. I personally wouldn't advise it. You might decide to be pragmatic. I know of a fantastic Christian woman who chose to stand as an MP for the party. She basically thought, which one's going to win in the next general election? I'll stand as an MP for that party. Why? Because she wanted to bring her Christian influence into a party that would be in power. It was nothing to do with what party she actually supported, but she thought these ones are going to win. Sometimes you can just see it. You're going to get a landslide. You just know. And she said, right, I'm going to start to, you know. And she did. She's actually now a baroness now in the House of Lords. But that was an interesting approach. She came and spoke to us years ago. Rev, we had an evening meeting. She came and spoke, and someone who was very, you know, she was standing as an MP for the Conservatives. We had someone in the church who was particularly pro-Labour, but in a way whereby he could never conceive of the fact that a Christian could be a Conservative. And he asked her this question, and it's really interesting to hear her answer it. She said, no, it's not about me being a Conservative, it's about me. I could see that they were going to win the next election, and I wanted to bring my Christian influence into the party that had power. Oh, wow. Well, that's pragmatic. There's interest, you know, so there's things to consider. When we think about Daniel and Esther, who are probably, I guess, Joseph as well, you've got these characters in the Bible that were really in the corridors of power. Interestingly, none of them pushed their ways into the corridors of power. If you look at their journey, it's really fascinating. It's like they were marked by humility and character, and God raised them up for such a time as this, as we read in the book of Esther. And so it's really interesting to see that it's not necessarily wrong to aspire to be in a position where you can have, you know, power and influence, but beware. You know, I think, you know, what do they say about, you know, power corrupts and, you know, is it absolute power? Absolutely corrupts, you know. So just kind of beware, really, if you're on that thing, that your heart is for God, that you're not just looking to have power for the sake of it, because that's an ugly thing. But I think what we do see in people like Daniel and Esther and Joseph is testing We see moments where they you know, either their lives are in danger or whatever, and they hold firm. The kingdom of God matters more to them than the government they're serving. Yeah, they're more concerned with the transcendent purposes of God than they are with the particular king or pharaoh or whatever they're serving. And it's demonstrated by the fact that at times they take their lives in their hands. Definitely Daniel and Esther. And so again, I think if your loyalty, if you haven't got a real heart for the kingdom of God, I would say don't get involved in politics. It's going to corrupt you. It'll corrupt you. So get your heart for God's kingdom, undivided, really caring about it. And then I think, yeah, God, you know, if you've got the right gifts and God's calling you into that, you're going to be really useful. And I will applaud you, support you, you know, because we need believers in every realm. Every single realm, every kind of job, every kind of setting, unless it's a fundamentally unrighteous job. But you know, the kingdom of Babylon was not known for its righteousness. What's fascinating is to see what Daniel rolls with certain punches. Other times he's saying, no, I'm not going to do that. They tried to stop him praying. He continues to pray 3 times a day with the window open. It's a real defiance, you know. I don't want to eat this food. It's like, what? You know. But then other times they change his names to Belshazzar, which is like, you know, it's basically the name of a false god, and he's brought in to join the gang of the magicians, and he's like, okay, fine, I'll roll with it. So real wisdom to know when you just kind of think, this is the system that I'm in, this is what it is. I don't know how many of you followed Tim Fallon. Years ago he was leader of the Lib Dems. But it reached the point where it became untenable on the subject of sexuality. Where, you know, very, very, very liberal views on sexuality. He's an evangelical Christian. In the end, he had to. I think it got to an awful point where he essentially said something he didn't actually believe in order to hold on to his role in the party. And then I think within days, stepped down. His conscience obviously just said, look, what, you know. He's still a member of the party. I think he's spokesperson for the party. Still an evangelical Christian, but there came a point where that tension, it was just too much. He couldn't lead that party through because he was evangelical and they had a very, very strong liberal stance on matters of sexuality. It just didn't work anymore. So you have to be aware of that, and I think that's where we're heading into as a nation. That's obviously particularly potent and emotive and much talked about subject. So as an evangelical Christian, you know, I think that's a real hot one there. I think it's also important to realise that in the Bible, worldly powers is this a strange tension where they're put in place by God, totally under his sovereignty, and he uses them for his sovereign purpose, and yet they're also sort of depicted as demonic beasts. And you've got to be able to hold. If you can't hold both those things in tension, okay, you're gonna get it wrong. Okay, so submit to authorities. Why? Because there is no authority other than that which God has put in place. Romans 13. Okay, it's just those that are in power under the sovereignty of God. Okay, you might say, yeah, but what about? That's a terrifying idea. The only thing more terrifying is that they're not under God's sovereignty. Okay, so they're both terrifying prospects, okay, but one is a lot more scary than the other. So God, in his eternal wisdom, as he works everything out according to his purpose, most definitely raises up people that are not godly and are wicked and evil, and he finds a way of weaving all of that together into his grand purpose. Okay, but the powers, it seems like every nation. You can't do a really, really in-depth Bible study of it because there's not loads of data, but it's suggested that there are demonic principalities, powers behind every nation. Fallen angels, essentially. I won't go into it in huge depth now, but you will find different nations are marked by certain things, and you watch them over the centuries, repeated kind of marks, repeated kind of dark kind of traits and things like that. There's a spiritual reality that goes on behind the earthly powers, that while it's all under the sovereignty of God, it's also a total bumfight in terms of like spiritual wickedness and evil and horrible things. You find it in Daniel, you know, he's praying, isn't he? And the archangel Michael comes and says, From the moment you prayed, your prayers were heard. But I've been fighting against, the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece. It's talking about demonic principalities. And I think it was one of the other angels came. Michael came and helped. I mean, it's like, what's going on? Daniel was on a riverbank praying. You think, but in the unseen realm, these huge things are going on. And if we don't have a spiritual worldview, right, what we're going to do, here's what's going to happen. The earthly powers that are ruling, you're going to get offended with, right? Or you're going to start to just be annoyed by or hate. And guess what? You're going to be tripped up in praying for them. In that moment, you've lost your actual authority and influence. The key authority and influence you've got, you've given away. Okay? Yes, we have influence in terms of lobbying and other things, we'll talk about that. But the key influence we have as believers is in prayer. And if you're holding something against people on a heart level, you're not going to be able to pray for them properly. So you think, that told them, I'm angry with them. No, you've totally given away your spiritual authority. You cannot, if you're going to be offended by someone or speaking badly of them, you can't then pray for them with power. You can't do it. You're not really, two things are incompatible. So this is why it's really important that you've got to have a spiritual worldview, and that you don't just buy into just naturalistic thinking. You'll completely miss the real action. You won't take your place as part of the body of Christ. That's why Paul says, isn't he, in 1 Timothy 3, 1 Timothy 2, he makes it really clear. He says, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. It's radical. They were in a dictatorship, folks. Okay? They were in a democracy where someone lied. The leader lied. I'm not trying to say it's a small thing, but just get some perspective. They're in a dictatorship where you walk down the street and there's thousands of people being crucified all along the street. Nations being plundered and destroyed. 20% of the empire slaves. Ripped up from wherever they were and in forced labour. Horror. The iron fist of Rome. Paul saying, pray for the kings, pray for the leaders. So us in our setting, not having it within us to pray for our setting we're in, it shows us how spiritually flimsy we are. Okay, it's the big thing for this. They were being told to pray to their king. Paul says, no, don't do that. Pray for you. Yeah, that's what the Christians were done for. And we could pray to Caesar. No, but pray for Caesar. They're under that sort of pressure. Worship Caesar. They're in that fire. They had something to talk about. We're spoiled. So this is really important. We go, no, boy, we've got it so good. So what does Paul talk about? That we might lead a peaceful life and quiet life, godly and dignified and everyone. What he's talking about there is what we've got. Now it may not be like that in 10 years' time. I don't know. But currently, and what we've enjoyed for decades is that. And the problem is when you have it good, you can become, something can happen, or you get entitled, or you get kind of spoiled. You think, no. We've got to pray for our nation. We've got to pray for our leaders. Because as I said before, I think it's a really complicated job. I wouldn't want it. How do you? I don't know. So I think these things really makes it important that we understand things in this way. Maybe to end this session, how do we handle what we might describe as legislated injustice? What do we do about that? Maybe the case of the unborn, is a helpful thing to think about abortion. Obviously, it's an interesting thing to see it play out in the States. Abortion is a huge deal politically. It's a huge deal spiritually per se. But in the States, it's a huge deal politically. So probably the reason why 4 out of 5 evangelical Christians voted for Trump was probably for a large part based on, no? You wouldn't have said so?
No, there's research to support that people would say that, but then they privately rank decisions at 8.
8? What was top?
Tax cuts.
Is
No,
that
immigration
really interesting?
tax cuts.
Because it's a reality, that's not okay. So I'm one of the people that's purporting this full story. But what tends to come through in the headlines is, time and time again,
Yeah.
is abortion. And obviously you've got so much going on at the moment in legislation in America. So many big, it's another big moment where it's come through. What do we do about that? Well, I think that the church in the UK has gone really quiet on abortion.
I think they are usually quiet for every matter, to be honest. From comparing to Korean church,
You may
the
be right.
church here, no voice
Yeah.
for anything.
Yeah.
Example, you know, I feel politically maybe UK is the middle, even liberal or the Democrats or whatever, you know, quite middle, but actually the real life under in our life, there are a lot of things we have to, you know, think about as a Christian. Example, you know, anti-discrimination law. You know, the education, because I learned in Korea online course, anti-discrimination law about, you know, gender issues. Education from the 3. I interviewed the 2 guys, parents. From the 3, they are teaching gender ideology.
That's right, yeah,
Yeah,
you're right,
so-
absolutely, yeah.
And the abortion now in UK, they are almost permit DIY abortion. They send the kit to the person abortion. It's issue, but
Oh, it's huge.
I think a church.
I think you're right, and I think we've got to reflect on it, and I think we've got to ask ourselves why that's happened. I think we've got to think through what it looks like to have an appropriate voice. So, for example, go on.
Yeah, the only thing I'm thinking about is that often our response is the legislation supports the taking of abortion, which then it makes us focus on the politics of it a lot, even though it's a reflection of an underlying, that people have a preference to want that. What I find really interesting is that, for example, in the Netherlands, you've got there's a lot more political parties, and there's a Christian party. Abortion is legal. The Christian party does not explicitly attack the abortion legislation, because it knows that out of research it shows that where you illegalize, make abortions illegal, there is a huge amount of abortions taking place. Not within the system, but on the line system. And a lot of people do it at home, and women get hurt, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on as well.
And they're more likely to be late-stage abortions as well.
Yeah. So it gets really messy.
So this yeah. Well, where I was going to go with it, I was going to say that there was a lot of injustice in the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And the church didn't seem to make it their priority to address that, speak into that, protest against that. Okay, their priority was winning people to Christ for the change of heart. And then God places people with changed hearts in every realm and sphere of society where they are to be salt and light, so influential. So and I think there's, you know, if you're called into the political realm as the party Bob was, you've got to think what does it look like if I'm in the legislative realm as a Christian? Then that's a very different, from my perspective, that's a very different situation compared to a Christian who's not. Yeah, so I don't think it's wrong to protest, I don't think it's wrong to lobby, I think there's arguments for trying to help restore the conscience of the nation. I understand that thinking. I don't think there's a lot of strong models biblically for it. I think there was an assumption. I mean, in the Roman Empire, very often it was quite regular to, people would have done abortions since time immemorial. But not only that, you'd also just leave your babies out if you didn't want them. Exposure, it's just you just leave them by the roadside.
It's not about Christian or non-Christian. At the moment, abortion is happening among the Christian a lot.
Well, that's okay. Well, we need to let's try and keep it on the thing of legislated injustice. So there are things that are legal, but they're unjust. I think I would want to say, firstly, that's always been the case. So I don't say it in a fatalistic way. So it doesn't matter. Now it does matter. But what you tend to find is if you read through the change of laws tend to come as a result of revival. Okay? So when there's a mass turning to Christ, what you often do find is, so for example, if you read about the Salvation Army, for example, so there's a revival through them. Initially they were disregarded and they were seen as crazy, but multitudes got saved, and that was during a time of what they called the Second Great Awakening. And you had the people that the Clapham sect and others who hearts on fire for God, moved by injustice, were in the corridors of power. I think William Wilberforce was earlier. That was as a result of the First Great Awakening. But others, what's his name, Shaftesbury, and others like this, God put something on their heart, and they campaigned for it, and things changed. So through the Salvation Army, they were involved in the changing of the age of consent in terms of when legalised sex and marriage. That was brought up from I can't remember what age it was to 16. I think it's recently moved up again. But it was a result of. So I think in that sense, God raises up and uses people that come to Christ. Some of them on a national scale, and praise God for that. It's wonderful. But I don't know necessarily that it's right. Because I think God puts people in place. They have an impact nationally. Joseph, they have an impact. But I don't think that means that necessarily all Christians should be campaigning for laws to change. I think we've got to reflect on that. I think we've got to think that through. I think some people will feel particularly motivated to do so. But I think the Great Commission, which is on all of us, is clear, which is to preach the gospel and see people saved. The vital element of that is that people then get a new heart. When people live out of their heart. Once your heart is new, you're motivated, you live differently, your values change. It makes sense not to have sex before you're married. Suddenly you get it. You're brought into the story of God, you understand what it's about, and that's really, that's let's be honest, imagine if everyone decided that they weren't going to have sex until they were married. Solves the abortion issue. Solved. Okay. So if you really want to get to the heart of it, that's really what's going on. Whether that's everything from consenting couples to awful attacks, but and everything in between. Okay. The heart of it is if everybody had a renewed heart and decided that they weren't going to have sex unless they were married, and that they believed in a man made in the image of God, regardless of whether they are, the child is in a good shape, physically, mentally, or not. You believe in the sanctity of human life, the uniqueness of human life, made in the image of God. There will still be a small number of cases where the mum's life is genuinely in jeopardy, and you have to work that through and think that through. But for the vast majority, 99%, I think it was, of abortions between 2018 and 2019 in Wales and England, of which I can't remember what the figures were. Luke preached it a little while back, but a horrific amount, or essentially down to the sense that there was a sense of this is going to negatively impact my mental health, so it's based on that. So not to say that that necessarily wouldn't be the case, but that's not how you determine. That's not how you determine what you do about it. So, we got into abortion. Didn't know if we were going to go there. We were meant to be talking about legislative injustice. So my main point is that God, I do believe God raises up certain people such a time as this, and puts them in places, and they have an influence, and it can be on a national level and an international level. It's up to God to do whatever He likes. I think for the majority of us as believers, our focus, our emphasis should be on real, zealous prayer for the lost, evangelism, hearts changed, and believing that then when a person with a new heart, wherever they go, they're going to have an impact, they're going to be salt, and they're going to be light. And I also think that God will put certain issues on people's hearts that they're just compelled. They're compelled to do something about. And I think you have to follow that. You do have to follow that. I totally believe in that. And I think when the church, I think the church as a voice is an interesting one. I think, unfortunately, at the moment, the world doesn't know always where to go to, and will have quite a limited number of what they consider to be representative voices for the church, and sometimes those voices don't say what we would want them to say, and that's really unfortunate and really difficult, and is an issue of the church should be united in its doctrine, really. I think that so that we say the same thing. But I do think we should be ready to give account. We should be ready to say what we stand for. Absolutely agree that. But I don't think we should be looking for a world to become Christian without people being born again. That's what brings the change, people getting born again. Okay,